We are now learning new details about another possible cover-up from the Obama administration. It involves Iran's attempt to shoot down an unmanned U.S. drone. Last week, Iranian warplanes fired on and missed the aircraft as it flew in international airspace. The Pentagon revealed this information for the first time yesterday, saying the drone returned to base safely. But today, the question lingers. Why are we only learning about this attack now? Why was this information kept under lock and key until the election was over? Here to talk about this and the abrupt resignation of CIA Director David Petraeus is former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations John Bolton and Fox News military analyst and retired four-star General Jack Keane. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here this evening. General Keane, let me start with you and this tragic news and very surprising news about General Petraeus and his abrupt resignation. What's your sense of sort of the implications for the nation and the really tragic end to what's been a stellar military career?
Well, just let me say on a personal, Liz, I mean, I know Dave Petraeus very well and his family, and I got just such a sense of loss and sympathy for the amount of pain that they're in. I love this family and him as well. So it's a personal loss for me, but it's also a loss for the country. This is our most accomplished general officer in generations, comparable to the legends we had in World War II. He didn't fight a war as big as they did, but he fought a war that we were definitely losing, and most people don't understand how tremendous it was that he was able to turn that around and then began to turn the war around in Afghanistan as well. No general officer has been offered 2 wars to turn around except MacArthur, and he failed miserably at the second one. He's a consummate public servant, loves this country, loves serving it, and he's got such tremendous ability. I have to believe that America has not heard the end of Dave Petraeus.
Well, I appreciate that, General Keane. Thank you. And I'd like to go to you, John, and talk about what does this mean in terms of what comes next at the agency, and also get your thoughts on what it means in terms of the Benghazi investigation. Do you think that General Petraeus will, in fact, be called to testify?
Well, I think in terms of Benghazi, it is inevitable that he will testify. I do not think that the resignation timing had anything to do with the hearings next week. Just because the general is now a private citizen doesn't mean that he can't be called to testify or subpoenaed if need be. It may well be the hearing would have to be closed because of the classified nature of much of the information. But there's no way you can preclude Congress from having him testify simply by leaving the agency. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions here in terms of timing, though, with respect to the presidential election and what the FBI investigation had uncovered, when the White House or the Attorney General knew about it. This is a very, very disturbing series of events, and I think it'll have a profound impact on the CIA. I think it's now incumbent on the administration to come up with a new director as quickly as they can to try and restore morale. This has got to be a shattering blow to the agency, to its personnel in the field, and the ramifications here for all of the agency's operations are very grave indeed.
Jack, let me ask you on the issue of this drone. You know, we've had these reports now that you had the 2 Iranian Soviet-designed fighters. They apparently fired on the drone and missed, which I think raises some questions about the skill and the capability of the fighters and the pilots. But give me your sense of what the Iranians are up to, what it means, and why we failed to respond in any way whatsoever.
Well, I think it's just part of the gradual influence that the Iranians are trying to have in the region at large, and also to acquire nuclear weapons. And they clearly want us out of the region, and that's been their stated objective for years. We're going to have clashes like this with them. And also, I think they clearly understand that the United States is in a weakened position in the region based on our policies for the last few years of disengagement. And they're encouraged by all of that. I mean, that's why they're on the rise in the region, and the al-Qaeda and affiliated groups are on the rise in the region. They're emboldened by it. You know, as to the timing of it, I mean, it seemed to me this was a routine predator operation, as I understand it. And as such, when United States property is attacked, either in the air or on the ground, I believe the administration, the Pentagon has an obligation, once they have the facts, to report that immediately to the American people. This was not a covert operation, which there's no obligation to report for obvious reasons. And so I don't understand, why this wasn't reported as soon after the event itself.
Ambassador Bolton, do you think there was something political in that decision to hold the reporting of the event until we got past the election?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any other explanation. The original report was leaked by people in the administration, a disturbing pattern that we've seen for the past several years. And yet the official Defense Department spokesman, when he went on the record, said, well, we don't normally talk about these things because they're classified. If it was classified before the election, it's classified after the election. If you don't want to comment on it, the standard formulation is we don't comment on intelligence-related matters, and yet they didn't do that. So it's of a pattern of trying to have it both ways, keep classified what is detrimental to the administration and leak out what benefits it.
Earlier, we told you about Iran's attempt to take down a U.S. drone. Well, there's another disturbing story circulating regarding that rogue nation. According to a number of Iranian bloggers, White House senior advisor Valerie Jarrett, who was born in Iran, has been facilitating secret one-on-one talks between Washington and Tehran. Today, White House spokesman Tommy Vietor vehemently pushed back on this story, telling Fox, quote, "There's not a shred of truth to this report." Back with reaction to this and more is Ambassador John Bolton and Fox News military analyst General Jack Keane. Thank you for sticking around, gentlemen. General Keane, the White House has denied that Valerie Jarrett was involved in these conversations, but it raises a larger issue of negotiations with Iran, which we know are, in fact, planned and going on in the P5+1. Can you talk a little bit about the advisability of being in negotiations with Iran and what it would mean if the U.S. was now suddenly in unilateral talks with that rogue nation?
Well, the Iranians have been negotiating with us for over 10 years as they advance their nuclear weapons program. It's something that they frankly welcome because it buys them more time. That is exactly what has been happening, and I'm convinced that's what will be happening here. They may throw us a bone or something to keep those negotiations going, but I'm not optimistic that much, if anything, will come of it. And if the negotiations were able to stop the nuclear weapons program, then we would have to ensure that the highly enriched uranium is out of Iran, and it's verifiable, certainly by competent inspectors on a regular basis. And I don't hold out much hope for that.
Well, and you've seen now consistently, Ambassador Bolton, instances where the administration has used political operatives, people like David Axelrod, to be engaged in policymaking on national security issues, to be out talking about these issues. Is it your sense that this may, in fact, be another case, or do you take the White House at its word that these stories are simply not true?
Well, I don't take the White House at its word. They're capable of almost anything. But when I first heard this story, I thought I was reading satire. I mean, surely they could not believe that Valerie Jarrett was somebody to negotiate with Iran. I mean, there are at least two things that are disastrously wrong if this is true. Number one, to send perhaps the president's closest advisor to ask for bilateral negotiations is such a signal of weakness, of needing, of caring, of wanting the negotiations, that it has to say to the leadership in Tehran, we've got the Americans exactly where we want them. We're not worried about sanctions. We're going to get out of this, number one. Number two, from an intelligence point of view, you couldn't get a better person to tell Iran everything they want to know about the president, how he thinks, how he acts, how Valerie Jarrett thinks. It's just inconceivable that you would give the Iranians that kind of advantage. So if it turns out the administration did it, it leaves us in a very weak position.
Well, and I wish that it were the only thing that was raising concerns in terms of our policy with Iran. General Keane, if you look around the world, now that we've had a few days pass, we're through the election, we know we're going to have 4 more years of Obama administration foreign policy. Do you see any place around the world where we're in fact better off, or where we're viewed as a stronger, more powerful nation than we were when Barack Obama first took office?
Well, absolutely to the contrary. The fact of the matter is, when America has very strong leadership, the world is a safer and, frankly, a better place. And when American leadership is indecisive or it's paralyzed by fear of consequence, which we've had a lot of, then the world is a much more dangerous place. And that is what you get from our allies in the region, particularly in those areas where our values and our national interests are being contested, as they are in the Middle East and Southern Asia. They all fundamentally believe the United States policy is to pull away from them and to disengage. And they are terrified by the prospects of an advancing Iran and an advancing al-Qaeda and its affiliated groups with a weakened United States as a player.
Well, and when you look at the issue of nuclear proliferation as well, Ambassador Bolton, I mean, Iran is a concern, but you look across the region and the extent to which you'll have other nations now clearly attempting to obtain nuclear weapons as they watch the Iranians go essentially unchallenged. How hopeful are you that the Obama administration will be able to take any firm steps to stop the spread of nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't think they are going to take firm steps. I think the odds now are that Iran will get nuclear weapons, and as even Secretary of State Clinton herself has said, if Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey, and perhaps others. So I think the situation is headed downhill, and unfortunately at an increasingly rapid rate.
Thank you both very much for being with us.